and other criminals were once children. If we study the childhood of these damaged adults, one thing stands out. These children had childhoods filled with abuse and emotional neglect. Good morning. I'm going to start by telling you 4 stories. In one corner, we have the story of Eileen, who was born to a 15-year-old mom. She never knew her dad, as he was behind bars for sex crimes. She was sexually assaulted by her grandfather, and she fell pregnant with this child. She became a sex worker and went on to shoot and kill 7 men. In 2002, Eileen, who was once a cute, smiling child, was sentenced to death by lethal injection. In the other corner, we have Hitler, who had an emotionally harsh father with a terrible temper, who often beat him. Hitler lost 4 of his 5 siblings in childhood and became withdrawn when his youngest brother died. The terror of the Third Reich was cultivated in his home during his childhood. On the right bottom corner, we have Osama, who was one of 50 children. It is often thought that this is where his need for significance and attention came from. He also had a teacher who instructed him in the importance of instituting pure Islamic violence. Using stories and parables with often violent endings, he was primed by the stories of being a loyal observer of Islam, even if it meant supporting death and destruction. On the top right-hand corner, meet Edmund. Edmund, whose parents divorced when he was 9 years old, was blamed by his alcoholic mother for the divorce. She was overly critical of her son and forced him to live in the basement of their home. From a young age, he fantasized about killing his mother. He shot his grandfather to death as a child and then took the lives of 10 women as an adult. Think about this. Genius IQ starts at 140. Edmund had an IQ of 145. We have to be mindful that most abusers were once victims. And we teachers have the power to stop the cycle of pain. Meet the children in the center. They had warm, nurturing caregivers and grew up to live happy, fulfilled lives. I don't actually know if that's true or not, but I'd like our story to have an happy ending. We learn our belief systems as very young children, and then we move through life creating experiences to match our beliefs. Children do not have a direct construct or measure of themselves. They create a construct or measure of their self from how people react to them. The adult who hurts others was more often than not a child who was rejected, bullied, or ignored. Train your teachers to know that the bully in the playground, the child who bites, the kids who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving of ways. The child bullied at home will want to feel safe. One way for him to feel safe is to be feared and to reassert his sense of control. So he turns into the bully on the playground, protecting his inner wounded child. This continues in his adult life. The cycle of damage continues as many victims will become victimizers. As teachers, once again, I say we can stop this cycle of violence. The story begins here. Labeling is a tool that humans use to resolve the impossible complexity of the environment. It can contribute to some of the deepest problems, though, that as mankind we face. The long-term consequences of teachers labeling a child smart, slow, dumb, or messy are profound. In a classic study, students in a primary school was randomly selected and were actually at a similar proficiency level on performing academic tests. Telling the same teachers that one group belonged to the upper 20% of academic achievers, the researchers Rosenthal and Jacobson came back a year later. The so-called bloomers outperformed their peers by 10 to 15 IQ points. The teachers produced a self-fulfilling prophecy in which students who were baselessly expected to bloom actually outperformed their peers. So please train your teachers to be mindful about labeling children in their care. When we have to label, let's do it sensitively and effectively. Instead of saying, your child distracts everyone in class and does not do any work, we could actually say and mean, your child has so much energy that at times he has trouble concentrating. Let's explore ways of channeling his energy constructively. We could probably try, Negative labels can have profound and harmful outcomes. It is the child labeled as fat who becomes an anorexic adult. When a person with anorexia looks into the mirror, they do not see an accurate reflection. Their subconscious sees themselves as fat, even if they are painfully thin. So how do we go from having cute cherubic toddlers who have a few traumatic experiences to all these damaged adults? The next video shows you in a few seconds how this downloading of our belief occurs in our subconscious brain, and unless as adults we learn to reprogram it, it will affect the adult life of the sweet children who once were. Can I have sound, please? That almost all adults who play out have experienced some childhood trauma. But unmindful caring of our children does not only lead to external death and destruction, it also leads to a lot of internal pain and self-harm. So for argument's sake, in the nurture versus nature divide, let's say that people are born innocent. Or even if they have a genetic predisposition to not being innocent, it will be their life experiences that trigger these genes. It is known that they will, after negative experiences, act in a way that they feel will protect them out of a sense of uncertainty or fear of not having their needs met. So the experience of the child will trump the genes. We have an adult podar. So obviously all of us in this room have had negative experiences, but all of us don't turn into serial killers or turn to drugs. How may subconscious programming have affected us, and how may it affect the children in our care? Have you ever looked at an elephant in a circus who's tied at the ankle with the help of a wooden peg and a rope? This mighty hulk could easily pull away. What prevents it? The reason is that when it was a baby elephant and tried to break away, a chain would pull it back and cause pain. One day, the baby elephant would stop trying and become an adult elephant scared of trying. It now has a subconscious with a self-limiting belief that will hound it all its conscious adult life. Think of how inadvertently we may be instilling this limiting belief in our children. Could it be when we use red ink and slash marks all over a page? Could it be when we grade kids poorly? And can we work with our children in a way that limits limiting beliefs? What is true of the elephant is true for the children in our care. Children who grow up believing they can't actually won't. Nearly all limiting beliefs such as I'm not good enough, or I'll never succeed, or I'm not lovable are created in early childhood. The effects of such self-defeating beliefs are incredibly traumatic and long-lasting for kids. So the first step is to focus on each child in our care and what he or she can do, as success is motivating and failure is not. So let's all keep the focus on what our kids are competent and capable of doing rather than what they are not. The subconscious mind is tremendously powerful. In fact, it can absorb or manifest any idea that you suggest to it. In the 18th century, priests would heal the sick by convincing them that God would make them well. This approach often worked, but rather than the priest or God, the subconscious mind was the real healer. We're all aware of the power of the mind. The placebo effect is proof of this. 50 to 75% of the effectiveness of drugs is due to the placebo effect. Unfortunately, in our preschools, most of our focus goes on educating the conscious mind, when it's actually the subconscious that needs most of our attention. Even when our kids go to school from our preschools, on the whole, what we need to remember is that individuals with high IQs will peak during their academic years. However, after that, they will easily be surpassed by individuals who have learned to master their subconscious mind. So the first step is an awareness that the way we talk to our children actually becomes their inner voice. What we as teachers think, believe, and act on will directly affect how our students think about themselves, what they believe they're capable of doing and not capable of doing, and how they act, and therefore their life outcomes. This happens when we know that we and the children in our care are not controlled by their genes. Like a computer, our brains are controlled by code. The code are the thoughts we think about ourselves, often influenced on how our caregivers see us. Genes are only a biological tendency for expression. Changing our state of consciousness can influence or even change completely the tendency for the genetic expression. When we do this, we can actually help rewrite the code of the children in our care. The gentleman you saw in the last image is Dr. Bruce Lipton, the author of The Biology of Belief. He's an American developmental biologist, best known for the idea that gene expression can be influenced by environmental factors. Our genes don't control us, we control our genes. How they get activated depends on our frame of mind. Lipton studies epigenetics, the science of cellular biology, and shows us that genes are the direct cause of only 1% of human disease. The rest of disease, the 99%, is caused by our minds. We can train our kids to respond to the world in empowering ways. Let me tell you a quick story of how. My son Drish went to Australia to study, and my niece Anoki, who's younger than Drish, one day called me up and said, "Lina Foy, Drish is teasing me." And I said, "And what's happening? Are you getting teased?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Yes." I said, "Who's winning the game?" She said, "He is." I said, "What if you stop getting teased?" She said, "Then I would win." A month later, she calls me up and she goes, "Lina Foy, guess what? Drish is no longer teasing me." Whenever we experience positive emotions such as gratitude and love, our brain releases certain neurotransmitters known as happiness hormones, which not only lead to positive effects in our minds, but also in our bodily functions. Positive emotions also lead to lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol. When we feel good, chemicals dopamine and serotonin flood our brains, or the brains of the children we care for. It not only makes us feel good, it also boosts the parts of our brains responsible for learning. Happiness leads to success. The more we believe in our own ability to succeed, the more likely that we will. We are what we perceive ourselves to be. Since our children are influenced by how we see them, they will carry the baggage of this to everything that they see and do. This can either be a suitcase of possibilities, or a baggage of fear, resistance, and doubt. Let's see how this can play out.
A choice in life. Every time you open your mouth, every time you take any action, you can choose either to act or speak in what we call the downward spiral, competition, fear, anxiety, pressure, all that, what we call the downward spiral, or you can speak in possibility. Right? Possibility is an open-ended domain. And I always tell this very simple and very lovely story of the two shoe salesmen, now well known. They went to Africa in the 1900s to find out if they could sell shoes. And they reported back to their company in Manchester, in England, saying, one wrote a telegram saying, situation hopeless, they don't wear shoes. The other one wrote, glorious opportunity, they don't have any shoes yet. Now, those are two statements describing the identical situation. They're both looking at the same thing. One sees situation hopeless, the other says, glorious opportunity, we don't have any shoes yet. Now that choice is a permanent choice in the life of every single human being at every moment of every day.
So you've just seen how our thoughts will affect how we see ourselves and how we interpret the world. Imagine this, in 1 minute we say between 300 and 1,000 words to ourselves. It's usually the voice that tells us that we're fat or stupid. This voice, the conscious voice, begins about the age of 6. But this voice can be trained to see things in an empowering way. Our minds can be primed, consciously and subconsciously, through supraliminal messaging. These are messages that can be seen or heard even though our conscious mind does not believe it is being influenced. But it is. It's what marketers do to us all the time. They prime us for the purchase. So what are some of the things we can do in our classrooms?
I see trees of green, red roses too.
It's a beautiful song, but for lack of time, I'll move on. We can play empowering songs in the classroom. We can have empowering messages. We can tell empowering stories, and we can have empowering activities. Strangely, it's the way we perceive our world or an experience rather than the world and the experience itself that defines our reality. We have a brain that can get stuck in patterns that hurt success or in patterns that look for opportunities. Unfortunately, most of our teachers have undergone an education where correction of their work focused on finding mistakes and weaknesses rather than focusing on individual children's strengths. We have to correct our system of education so that children don't become frozen by failure, but surge above it. When we begin to focus on the strengths of the children, we will empower them to respond to challenges in life with a positive, strong view of themselves. A teacher that builds confidence in a child will have an incredibly positive influence. Remember the research. A teacher's expectations can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can disempower our kids to learn helplessness, or we can teach them to learn optimism, which simply means we empower them to explain the negative events in their life in an optimistic rather than pessimistically way. If we can teach our children to control their self-talk, we will have made the best use of our teaching time. Positive self-talk leads to optimistic children who have an optimistic outlook. Optimists have a stronger immune system. Very important at this point in history when we are witnessing an epidemic of depression. Optimists overall are more successful. Talent is overrated if it's not matched by optimism. I can promise you if these two kids run this race again, the one on the right is going to win next time. And even if he doesn't, he will win the race of life and be happier and more successful. Traumatic events during childhood can affect our children right into their old age. If it is not the genetic disposition of our children that will direct their destiny, but more so the environment and the way that they direct their thoughts, then we should retrain ourselves to teach the conscious mind, but empower the subconscious mind. 20 minutes is like a drop in the ocean when it comes to this concept. If I only have planted a seed of curiosity in your minds to read more and seek more understanding, I will feel that my trip to Jaipur was worthwhile. I've also placed a summary of thoughts and concepts in a handout that all of you should have. Please do attempt the exercises. And if any of you have questions, you can write to me, Lina, Lina, @kkel.com. I've been nominated as the Vice President of the ECA, but who I'd really like to nominate in my place, if she could just stand up, is Divya, who's started her Silver Jubilee year with Kangaroo Kids. Any problem I have, like getting these printouts done, is all thanks to her. She, Kusum, and many others are literally the wind beneath my wings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ashar. We kindly